Hello, many thanks for joining us here on Moomen Tonight. Tonight we take a look at the media. And you know that the 1992 Constitution provides the freedom of speech for all citizens of Ghana. And to that extent, what it means is that everyone is free to participate in the media space, whether they have professional training or not. Tonight, we focus on professionalism within the media because that has come under the radar for some time now. And we have gotten the very right person to address this issue for us. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Communications at the University of Education, Winneba. But in addition to that, he's also a member of the National Media Commission. I'm talking about Professor Andy Ofori-Birikorang. Prof, thank you very much for accepting us into your office. And I'm very excited because the last time I spoke with you, I was speaking to you as somebody in the capacity or with the title doctor. Now, Professor, that's a huge achievement. How long ago did you get this?
Okay, since last year around December, but formally, the title, the letter came in March. And so officially, let's say I've been a professor for about 4 months. But, you know, your promotion takes effect from the date that you put in the application. So if you go back then, it means I've been a professor for about 6 to 7 months now.
In Chi, the word for professor is obinfo. That must have been some hard work. Tell me about it.
Of course, I have, in my own personal capacity, had always respected professors because once you come into the academia, that's the ultimate to go. And it needs some hard work. It means you have to endure. It means you have to publish. It means you have to teach and teach well. It means you have to mentor. And I've gone through all those rudiments and taken me here. And remember, I came here in 2010, so it's taken me almost 9 years, to 10 years to get there.
That's, for me, a relatively short time. I know people who have spent 6 years looking for a master's degree, for instance.
Yeah, it's true. And that means that, first, let me say, you need to work hard. But it also depends on the environment in which you find yourself, the people who are your bosses and who are mentoring you. Once you come the first time, you have mentors. And I was very fortunate enough to have some excellent mentors. The first person on this campus that I met as a mentor was Professor Abaka, who is now the chairman of the council, governing council, and then Professor Sechibedu. And they gave me encouragement. Apart from that, you need to have a cohort of colleagues who are also interested in your progress. And throughout, all the colleagues at Communication and Media Studies have always supported me. Even when you are not a professor, they call you professor, and that will mean that you have to work hard to get there. So all those motivations have helped me to get there. I don't think it's a short time because when you are appointed as a lecturer, 4 years you have to become a senior lecturer. 3 years after you can become a professor, and I think that I try to follow that kind of progress. With
your new credentials, you've also recently been appointed Dean of the Faculty, and then in addition to that, you are a member of the National Media Commission. That's enormous pressure, isn't it?
Surely it is. Before I even became a dean, I had a lot of time on my hand to teach, to go out with my students, to encourage people to do a lot of things that we in academia do. Now, when I became dean, I realized that I had so many things to do that even teaching was becoming a headache for me to teach the way I want to teach in terms of enough time. Because I became even when I was not a professor then, I was the dean. And it meant meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. Then I became a member of the National Media Commission. And again, there too, meeting. In fact, for this week alone, there has been about 3 or 4 meetings I've not been able to take part because I have to teach, I have to attend meetings here. So it comes with enormous pressure and challenges. And you need to really sit down and program yourself and your time in order to meet all those commitments. So it is, but I am trying all that I can to make sure that I meet all those commitments.
I've come across many professionals as well as students from other institutions apart from the University of Education, Winneba, AUCC, for instance. I've come across people in Tamale and in Wa and even in Sunyan recently, and they are practicing journalists who mentioned you as one of the people who trained them. And to that extent, I feel obliged to ask you what your assessment is of the space or the practice of journalism in Ghana, since you are very much involved in training professionals at the highest level.
Thank you very much. Let me first state that we find ourselves in what we call the disruptive era. The practice of journalism, the professionals who are found within the practice, and then the way it is practiced has changed drastically over the last 10 years. In fact, as we speak now, we are dealing with people whom we have trained and who are being trained, who are what we call the digital natives. And so digitization has disrupted the way we used to see journalism. And there has been a lot of changes. And therefore, if you look at the space, we have, because of digitization, the broadcast industry has widened in scope and in number. The press and newspaper industry has also done the same thing. Now, in addition to this, we have social media. And so the way perhaps you were trained, because I don't know whether you belong to you are a digital native or a digital immigrant, but the way you were trained, the way people that I respect so much as professionals like Ayeboafo, like Cabral, the way they were trained, it's not the same way that we have been trained. And then what we also see is that because of the infiltration of social media, journalism as a practice, journalism as a profession has been turned upside down, because we are not following the conservative way of training journalists and practicing. And so the assessment is that everything that is happening is inuring to the benefit of democracy and democratic practices. But of course, everything that you can talk about has its own pros and cons. But in the larger realm, I think that we are training more journalists because there are more broadcast stations and networks than before. There are more newspapers than before. And when you pull all these things together, we can see that we have had progressive trends in journalism practice in Ghana, especially since the coming into being of the 1992 Constitution. So I am satisfied. There are more room for improvement. We need to train our journalists to be more professional than how we see them. They should be more ethical. But there are various elements. There are various tenets of it. First, you have to look at training first. Now, how do we train them? What kind of training do we give to them? Now, what kind of training do we have? What is the disjuncture between our training and theirs? And how have they or have we left them behind? Because, you see, if you are training digital natives, that means all the trainees who were born within the period of digitization, and then you yourself, you are not digital native, it means that you have to find yourself a way to come to where they are. And that is why we say you have to migrate. You become a digital immigrant in order to train them. And so that disjuncture must first be closed. So sometimes you hear the veteran journalists saying that, oh, journalism has become so bad, people are not practicing it. Because there's a gap between what we had, the training that we already had, and the kind of training that these people are having. Again, there's a gap between the era in which they were born and the era in which we are born. So we have to close that, and it starts with training. Because if what we call I'm born before computer, and somebody is born within computer, and the person has started using computer, somebody is born within the social media age, and we are not born within the social media age, you, the educator, have to come down. You have to travel into the social media age in order to teach them, in order to address their concerns, in order to address the trends. Because whatever, no matter how you look at it, these are the trends that will determine democracy, that will determine free speech and free expression, that will determine how journalism is practiced. And so that's how we find out. Generally, majority of our journalists are practicing according to standard. I'm satisfied generally, with whatever is happening. Except that for every practice, there are exceptions that we have to do. There are people who will be deviants. Now, but I'm talking about negative deviance because there are positive deviants in a way. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I'm satisfied with general scope, the landscape of how journalism is being practiced in the country now.
But you are an educator, and you are aware that for lawyers, they have the bar. So you could be the best law student, but until you are called to the bar, you cannot practice. Same for medicine, and even recently for public relations, you have to be a member of the IPR in order to qualify as a professional practitioner. Same cannot be said for journalists and the journalism profession. You have said you are generally satisfied with the standards, but to the extent that there is no professional body to regulate the way journalists go about their works. Again, you talked about ethics. If I break the code of ethics of the GJA, for instance, it's just an association. There's no law binding me to obey those ethics and so on and so forth. Do you think it's about time that a professional body comes up to regulate journalism in the country?
The first thing is that you have to talk about what kind of regulation you're talking about. Now, any regulation that seems to curate free speech and freedom of expression is unacceptable. Now, but even that, you realize that there are also regulatory regimes. And the first is the Constitution itself, is the #1 regulatory regime. Even though the Constitution gives access to free speech and said it's guaranteed, in the same Constitution it subjects it to issues of national security, to overall interests of people, to other people's rights. And so there's that first regulatory regime that we need to understand. That the fact that you have free speech doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want to do. Doesn't mean that you can practice your free speech or expression to the detriment of national security. So there is a regulatory regime. That's the first one. The fact that the National Media Commission has been set up is also another regulatory regime. Even though you would think that because the National Media Commission is there to help protect and preserve the independence of the media, it regulates somehow. The regulation can be from the moral perspective, because it doesn't have the power, it doesn't have the punitive power to maybe fine an erring journalist or media house. But it's a regulatory regime all the same, because ever since I went to the National Media Commission, we've had situations where individuals, organizations have come before us for settlement. Why have they come? Because there's something wrong, and there's a regime that is regulating what is wrong and trying to bring some kind of settlement. So that is good. Then remember, there are also deterring laws. You can't just make a speech, defame somebody and go away. The person can take you to court. So that one too is something that we have to look at. Then, because the GJA has the code of ethics, whether you like it or not, even though you say that, oh, okay, you are not, people may decide to defy, but as professional, then the first moral responsibility is your conscience. And the fact that you have taken upon yourself to practice this kind of profession. And even as you sit here, when you're interviewing somebody, if you know that you are using unethical means, it hits your conscience. And that itself is another regulation. It can be self-regulation. But the point is that without punitive measures, it doesn't mean that we don't have regulations. We have regulations that guide how journalists should go about their duties. And now I said the Constitution is there, the National Media Commission itself is there, the courts are there for people to take you there. So no matter what, so we don't need any further regime. If we needed, we wouldn't have passed the Right to Information Act. If we needed anything to regulate how journalists practice their profession, we would have passed that. But we realize that even with all the freedoms that we're talking about, we lack something. We lack free access or immediacy of getting information, because there were so many obstacles, and we needed to solve that one with the Right to Information Act. So I think then I will have to understand that we don't need any further laws. And I've had those arguments.
I have a number of follow-up questions, and it's interesting that you are a member of the National Media Commission, and you are saying we don't need any further regulatory bodies, so to speak. But the National Media Commission itself has been accused of just being a toothless bulldog. You bark, but you cannot bite. And you have said here yourself that you cannot take any journalist on when he has erred, for instance. That's number one. Number two, you talk about the conscience of the journalist being their best judge. Within the profession. But within the same profession, the journalist has to survive economically. The media house has to survive economically. If that story will bring them all the eyeballs and make their newspaper sell, it will defeat any conscience.
No, you see, maybe we move into the realm of ethics. Now, the first thing any journalist has to understand that when you get a story, the first onus is on you with the speed to publish, and nobody should take that from anybody. Now, when there's a story, and that story, even let's say they say the story, you have a story, you have to be sensitive to the needs of people. Yes, it's true, but journalists have a duty to put that story there. The only thing that they have to do, they have to make sure that when they put that story there, they take into consideration the interest, the sensibilities and the sensitivities of other people. But nothing prevents them from doing that. Now, when you talk about the economic aspect, that's a different ballgame altogether. We're talking about remuneration, as to whether they are paid well or not. You see, the way we have the trend of globalization and the economy has brought so much materialism into our system. And so journalists who used to pursue truth and freedom without even thinking about possessing material things have to go that way. Because every facet of our economy, of our system has been monetized. Education, health, politics, judiciary. And so you can't take those people aside. And so monetization comes in there. And so in that state, then what we need to do is to find out how we can ensure that they are adequately compensated for the pursuit of their profession, so that they will not do what others do not do. Because I've read stories that you could clearly see that, you know, a journalist had just taken one side of the story. You know, when you take one side of the story, you will be publishing, the person may be telling you everything about the fact. You'll be publishing the facts of the truth. Now, there's the fact of the truth and the truth of the facts. Now, when you say the facts of the truth, now when you go to A and the person gives you all the sides of the story, you are taking the facts of the truth. Now, when you have to get to B, and then when you get to B, then you have the truth of the facts, because you don't have all the facts. When you get to B, then the B tells you, and you have the truth about all the facts. That's when you can proceed to publish. But we don't do that, because A might have made me economically better. And so once I have his story, I think I should go ahead and publish his story. And so we can't use the situation of your economic situation, economic disempowerment, and say that because this will lead to people doing what they're not supposed to do, we need to regulate them. No. We need to make sure that their economic situation is improved somehow. And that's another issue altogether we can discuss, whether through some form of maybe regulating owners or acting owners, media house owners, and media house owners to maybe pay a little more. That's another thing. Or some kind of unionization of journalists in various media houses in order to press for some kind of increment or better conditions. That's it. So when we talk about regulation, we can't bring all those in there. But coming back to National Media Commission, it's true. We have had situations where people have said, okay, you know, it seems we can't even, we sit here, we talk, and we can't punish like the courts can do. And so maybe we needed some form that, okay, we can say, we'll not allow you to come on air for 1 week. But that will be stifling press freedom, because that power can also be used capriciously. And your body has been established in order to prevent and protect independence of the media and free speech. I know that, for instance, in Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, they have something like that. When there's a body like the National Media Commission, and they can take punitive measures. They can fine you 1,000, let's say, Ghana cedis or dollars, 2,000, and people think that is working well. I don't have any problem if we decide that we want to bring them. If the larger number of our people believe that, we need that. But if you ask me personally, we don't need that. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is that freedom of speech is expensive. It's expensive by the way our regulations or our rules will need to support it. And therefore, anything that you do that will, as I said, create it, and bring it down, cut it into some kind of measure, you are dealing with the larger piece of democracy. Because remember, just when the criminal libel law was taken out, more radio stations have come out. That alone was some kind of regulation, because people could not write freely. Because who were taking people to court? Is it you? It's the same big men who could go there. Even now, let me tell you what happens. When a story is written about a big man like me, and even if the story is true, the facts and everything is true, the first thing that I do is that, and it's defaming me or it's bringing my reputation down, the first thing I do is to go to court. And then the journalist, afraid of going to court, will just quickly apologize, even though he might be having the facts, the truth of the fact. The moment the journalist or the media house decides to pursue the case in court, you see that the party withdraws, because they have that power and they try to use that power. What journalists do, and we have to understand this, all journalists are reformers. They are trained to come and reform society. So every time a journalist like you come out to interview me, because you want to go out and reform, you are a reformer, so you want to go out and reform the largest society.
Well, but I can also tell you about instances where journalists have not meant to reform. Recently, the GJA had a case of a journalist in one of the Accra-based radio stations blackmailing a top official, asking for thousands of hundreds of Ghana cedis in order to kill a story that he had gotten about him. Clearly, this kind of journalist is not out to make any positive impact on society.
Yeah, Abdul, how many can you talk about? How many journalists do we have in the country? Even within GBC, how many journalists do we have there? Of course, when one nut is bad, it spoils everything. But we can't use just the example, one example. Because I, myself, I know journalists who have taken money, 50,000 Ghana cedis, in order to pursue a personality and destroy that person. But I won't use that journalist and condemn every journalist. I can't use that. And so, but I was talking about the training that we give you. Now, the training is a reformist training. We imbibe and inculcate in you the idea of a reformer. So reformation is part of what you do. So when you step out, all that you look, how can I change it? How can I do that? And you do that, you know, one of the things that journalists do is that first, they realize that some people have so much power and they want to accumulate more power. And as reformers, what journalists seek to do is to take that power or part of that power and redistribute among the populace. Because when power resides in one person or one group in such huge a quantum, then it becomes dangerous to democracy. So journalists as reformers decide that, okay, I'll look for those who have so much power, take it and redistribute. That is the training that we give. People may be trained but may not go out to do that. But we train you that go out there and reform society. Go out there and change society. In the course of reformation, people may change their position, they may change their stand, they may use a different lens. And there are others there who are out there because of their selfish interest, try to persuade, convince people that no, this way is better than that way. But we have them in minority.
Well, you talk about the repeal of the criminal libel law. It's an issue I would like us to come to. But in touting some of the credentials of the repeal, you talked about it extending or expanding the space for more media houses to come up, and so freedom of expression was entrenched and so on. But at the same time, you talked about the fact that powerful people now cannot just take people to court because they have been exposed and so on. But the flip side, Prof, is that even though there may be freedom of expression, in recent times we found that other persons who may have felt affected by the work of journalists have devised different means of dealing with those journalists. And so in 2015, a journalist who works with the Peace FM, for instance, in the Brong-Ahafo region was killed. This was a journalist who was pursuing a certain story, an investigative piece. He was killed. In recent times, we have been told by no less a person than Professor Kakari about Manasseh's case and the fact that Manasseh had to flee the country for his own safety. Edward Adeti, a journalist based in the Upper East region, exposed the then member of government for some acts of corruption. He says he doesn't feel safe. We know about the murder of Ahmed Swali and so on. These could be new strategies that persons are using to pursue journalists who perhaps have done work that's against them. You agree?
Yeah, I agree totally. You see, it's because there's a creeping disregard for law in Ghana. That's the first one. Now, people commit crime and they get away from it. So if you are, whether you are in education, whether you are in journalism, whether in health, if you live in a system where there's a total, normally say that there's a disregard for law, no matter what you do, no matter the kind of ethical decisions and process that you follow, it won't work. So in addressing that issue, we have to address the very fabric of our society. Now, what I have realized, and as someone who has stayed in school in the US for about 7 years. And when I came out, what I realized was that in this country of ours, the rule of law doesn't always, in most cases, work. The rule of law just means let the law rule. That's what it means. Let the law rule. Here in Ghana, especially, even after we have achieved democracy, the rule of law the law doesn't rule, men rule. Now, when we sit down, we make laws for ourselves. When we sit down, we go to parliament, we human beings make the law. The moment the laws are accepted, human beings become subject of the law or subject to the law. The law rules you. But we don't understand that way. We think that we make the law and we can trample upon the law. So, because those people have realized that when they go to court, they will lose. When they come before the National Media Commission, they will lose because the journalist will have performed his job professionally and ethically. But as long as it defames him in a way, it brings him down within society, then he has to find a way and unorthodox means. And then they look at the larger society and realize that there's a loophole. Once you have power, once you have money, you can commit crime and get away with it. So what we as a society need to do is to address that larger issue. The larger issue of making sure that the law rules. Now, I know you, in your book, before you compiled it, I was reading a lot of the things that you say. On the road, look at what is on the road. The carnage on the road is because of disregard for the law. Is because the security agencies that they themselves are supposed to do are also disregarding the law. So no matter how we want to make sure that media freedom is there, if the larger fabric of the society, the foundation, which is the law, is not regarded or is disregarded, is trampled upon, is looked at with impunity, people, then we can never, nowhere. And that's why various parts of the economy is crumbling because people have total disregard for the law. They can do anything and go away with it. So we can put in all the professional measures. we can put in all the protection. We can elevate freedom of expression to the highest level. We can make sure that media is independent. As so far, freedom is there, journalism is there. But if we don't address that issue, now journalists have been attacked by security men. No, nothing happens to them. Journalists are attacked by politicians. Nothing happens to them. Journalists are attacked by teachers, unions, other people. Nothing happens to them. So what is the freedom for? And so that is the issue we have to address. If that's not addressed, and that is where journalists have to make it their number one perpetual agenda. Because that is, it affects you. And anything that affects journalism affects democracy. Remember, information is power. And that is what journalists seek. They seek information, which is power, and they give that power to citizens to allow all of us to live in a very credible, harmonious society. Because people have realized that information is power, those who are in authority, those who are using the power anyway, anyhow that they like, will make sure that you don't get access to that power. And so addressing the issue of attacks on journalists is not something that is in the hands of National Media Commission, in the hands of GJA, in the hands of even the journalists. It's in the hands of the people who have been entrusted with the power to protect us, in the hands of the national security agencies. And as long as we allow people to get away with crime, to get away with impunity, what they do, we can never move forward. And that is what we have to address. Once we address that, we can be free.
Give us some education about the state of affairs before the repeal of the criminal libel law. What was the media space looking like?
You know, the criminal libel law had been in the books of even before the 1992 Constitution. But because, let me say, as a young man growing under the regime of Liman and Rawlings I before Rawlings II, you know, most of the life that I grew up into and reading was under the Rawlings regime. And it was a military regime. So they didn't even have to bring the criminal libel law. But after the 1992 Constitution, you know, that statute was still in the books. And when it was used against some prominent journalists, then that's what they need. That's where it became clear that if you are in opposition, if you are a opposition newspaper, or even a government newspaper, you were cowed in submission, because anytime that you publish something, especially against a politician, there's a likelihood that the criminal libel law will be used against you. So before that, now the freedom of press was there, but it was there in measured terms. Anytime that you had a story, and even you believe that the story was factual and truthful, the fear of committing crime, libelous crime, always was a halo over you. And therefore, people were afraid. In fact, journalists were afraid to push, because they had some, you know, that time, a lot of politicians had done things that they could write about. And once 1, 2, 3 powerful politicians used it, then journalists became afraid. Now, you remember that after the repeal, and that's why I said after the repeal of the criminal libel law, there was a mushrooming of radio stations and mushrooming of newspapers. Now, in the beginning, we didn't have a lot of the things that we were talking about, but it allowed journalists to get access to information. Before that, we didn't have access to information. You know, even when you have the information, there was a fear of publishing. So only 1, 2, 3 journalists rose into prominence because they were positive deviant. They didn't care. And some of them had gone to jail because of that. Now, we didn't have people like you coming, because the fear was there that if you don't take care, your family will even come to you, your friends, hey, stop that story, or don't go there. And so it was relatively free, but it's not as free as we have it now. Everybody was cautious of what they were expressing or what they were putting in the press or what they were broadcasting before the repeal of the law. And after the repeal, I think we have the freedom and the opportunity to express ourselves freely has been booming than before.
Right, we'll take a short break. We're in the office of the Dean of the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Communication, as well as a member of the National Media Commission. We are talking to him about the media in Ghana. We'll take a break. When we return, I'll be asking him questions about journalism and the training of journalists and what he makes of the so many schools that are popping up, attempting, so to speak, to train journalists. Join us after this break. This is Moomen Tonight. We're coming to you from the University of Education, Winneba, in the office of the Dean of the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Communications. He's also a member of the National Media Commission, Professor Andy Ofori-Birikorang, and he has been talking to us about the media in Ghana. We've so far looked at the history behind the bringing into being of the repeal of the criminal libel law, among other issues. But Prof, just before we went on the break, I indicated that I wanted to ask you, especially so because you are a teacher yourself. There are so many schools, and sitting in our office, even at GBC, people come with all sorts of certificates looking for jobs, and you ask them, where is the school also from? And you find out that the school is really not, perhaps not accredited to any reputable institution, and so on. You are a teacher, but also you're now a member of the NMC. Has this come to your attention?
Well, let me say yes and indirectly, because I'm on the National Media Commission as representative of the Journalism Training and Communication Training Institution. So all communication and journalism training institutions, the umbrella, I represent them. Right. And I can tell you that all institutions that are accredited to train journalists or communicators are members of our association. And so the first is, if you say that, are we troubled by the number of schools that are training journalists, I'll say no. Now, are we troubled by those that are not accredited? I'll say yes. Because if you are not accredited, it will be troubling, because it means that you don't have the license and the capacity to teach. Before you are accredited, now we ask some professors, educators to come to your school, look at your environment, whether you have the resources, human and material resources to start the program, whether you have the students, whether the students are coming there with the requisite qualifications. All these things come into being. Now, but you also have to understand that if we are having a lot more training institution, journalism institution, it's also good for the country. Before so many schools sprang up, we had only the Ghana Institute of Journalism and then the School of Communication Studies. I think this university was the third in terms of public institution. Then University of Cape Coast has joined. So in terms of public institutions, and then NAFTI, these are about 4. Now, if you look at the number of radio stations, the number of newspapers, the population, it is clear that we needed to train more journalists. And so even public institutions that are already training people, they have to be accredited. So if there is any institution that has not been accredited, then we will find it very troubling, and there's no way you can become a member of society, but of our society or organization. But remember that most of the institutions that you say are mushrooming are also affiliated to public institutions. For example, if you take University of Education Winneba, we have about 3 or 4 training institutions that are affiliated to us. So the students who go there actually carry our certificate. Legon, the same thing. Uses the same thing. So there are a number of institutions that come. Of course, there are other pseudo ones that they establish. You know, you can Moomen School of Broadcasting and what they can come. And then because Moomen has experience in broadcasting, students or prospective applicants they believe him that he's doing the right thing. And of course, sometimes they go and they teach them the right stuff. But the Moomen is not, the institution is not accredited to perform the function that they perform. So that, when you talk about that, then it's troubling. But generally, most of them are affiliated to a public institution that are supposed to mentor them. And so when they come out, except that sometimes the mentoring is not done effectively. That one I can say. Because already you have your own students, you have your own institution, and you have to go out there. Winneba, for instance, has about 3 or 4 institutions, journalism institutions, that they are mentoring. And sometimes it's not even the whole institution, it's just the journalism part that they give to you. And so you have to make sure that apart from communication and media studies, you have to go to AUCC to look at their masters, you have to go to JE to look at their program, you have to go to Blue Crest. And so you are monitoring all these. So if you don't monitor effectively, then the products will become half-baked products. But generally, I think that the number of training institutions that we are having, looking at population, looking at the media landscape that is widening, I think that's good.
We've already talked about the state of the media, and you expressed optimism and satisfaction with the general atmosphere, but specifically talking about the credibility of many of the people you train. And by you, I'm talking about the society that you even represent on the NMC. Questions have been raised. For instance, you read headlines of newspapers, and the headlines have nothing to do with the body of the story. You listen to radio, and the stuff that is being described, if you are on the grounds listening to the reporter, you will be confused as to whether it is exactly what you are also seeing that such a reporter is reporting on radio or on TV and so on. To that extent, so direct question, headlines, for example, how do you train people to produce headlines? Is it just to draw the eyeballs and the attention and then it ends there? Remember, Prof, that you have talked about the digital world. People are so much in a hurry that sometimes they don't even spend time to read the entire story. So, for example, professor rapes one girl and then the story ends there. And then you read the body of the story, and the professor they are talking about, even though the professor is also called Andy, is a certain mechanic who has earned the title Professor Andy. Yeah. He's not the professor of the university. Yeah. And yet, people might go out believing that it is that professor at the University of Education. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, you see, remember that there's a 2-tier thing. The training that you give to students is there, and then when the student has graduated and enters the newsroom, there's another training there. And so nowhere would educators train students to give sensational headlines, but sensationalism is part of newsmaking everywhere, because even if the body of the story is in congruence with the title may be sensational, and you read, you can get it, okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If we say, let's say, professor rapes student, and you read, and indeed it's a professor who raped a student, just that, because when you say professor rapes a student, every professor will be one to read. And story headlines are supposed to attract for people to read, and the story is in congruence with the title. There's nothing wrong. Now remember that this is a kind of training because we need to create headlines that will attract people to read the story. What is the motivation for me picking Daily Graphic headline? What's the motivation for me trying to listen to GBC News? Because I listen to the first 3 minutes, the headlines. And in the headline, they read 1, 2, 3. If the headlines
the headline must represent...
No, that's what I'm saying. The headline, so I'm giving the first tier. The headlines, we train students to give headlines. To give headlines that will attract people to read. It doesn't matter whether that headline is sensational, as long as it is incongruent with the story. Now, after you have trained the person will come to GBC. There are editorial processes. Unless we are talking about pseudo journalism, unless we are talking about yellow journalism, and yellow journalism is frowned upon everywhere. It's the game that belongs to the tabloids. But you come to GBC, you have gone to a reputable news media, you have trained your students, you sent them there, you give them all the guides and the guidelines for constructing a good news story. A good news story must attract people to read. Now, you pick a story from the media house, and the headline and then the body, they are different. Where did it come from? Did it come from the room, or it came from the editorial process? Sometimes it comes from the editorial processes, because that is why we have editors there to make sure that whatever story goes out meets the principles and tenets and the ethics of journalism practice. So you cannot, in all situations, in all cases, send it back to the classroom, because the classroom, the student is taught the ethics and the professionalism of the practice. In practice, that's what we have to come to. What happens in practice and who checks it? Now, there's a problem now because of digitization. In this era, you know, editors and news media houses have editors who are whom we call gatekeepers, trying to make sure that a particular story gets there. In terms of even the structure of the story, everything is done to meet professional standard. Now, editors now are no more gatekeepers, they have become gate watchers because of social media, because of digitization, because of the competing trend of trying to get a story ahead of the other. Because now, GBC is competing with all media houses. So I'm sure that even the process of editing a news story, even though you may be trying to do it professionally, you are also fast-tracking it. In the attempt to fast-track, you don't want me to tune into another TV station when you are there. So we have to look at the kind of training that happens when you go there. Let me ask a question. How many times do you have workshop and in-house training to update your knowledge? How many times in a year? Since we started?
Sometimes 0.
That's it. So new ideas are emerging. Now, as you start working, you also lose track of sometimes the training that you have. You have to be prompted. Say, okay, you know, you are losing track. This is not what you train you. So where are the workshops? Where are the training, the refresher workshop that are given to the journalists? Sometimes GJ will get some money from outside, quickly arrange a workshop, and you go and drink tea, you eat meat pie and all that, and then you come. But in-house training, GBC, TV3, City, all those, what are they doing? It is during that time that professionals like myself, Professor Kakari, Audrey, Cabral, will come in there and remind you of, let me use the word, the oath of professionalism that you saw whilst you were in the classroom. And then you get to know that you are trending on different ground. Then it's when that time that will also let you know the new things that are emerging. For example, now we are in the era of data journalism, where you don't just write a story and leave it. Your story must be backed by data. Hard data, how far? So if you say that the current government or the present government is corrupt, where is your data? We are not allowed in the current era to just write a story and leave it without backing it with data. If you say that population has ballooned, where is your data? If you say that there are more criminals in a certain part of Accra than others, where is the data? That's data journalism. We are not practicing data journalism because you might have trained somebody in the era when it was not data journalism. The person is practicing now. Where is the in-house training that allows the person to know that now we are in this era, move there. You can't be telling stories. Most organizations that have money, the bank institution, regularly give their staff refresher courses to keep them, make them abreast of the current trends. But we don't have the same thing in journalism. So that is one area. So sensationalism does not come from the class. It comes from the media house. It needs to be addressed from that perspective.
Interesting. Prof, talking about the NMC again, does social media fall within your remit?
Okay. You see, it depends on what people want to see. Now, I've been there for barely 6 months.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say that, no, we can't even regulate social media, or we can't talk about social media. When I read it, unfortunately I don't have it here. If I read it wrong, we have it. Because it talks about any mass media, any mass communication medium. And social media is a mass communication medium. And so, except that you don't want to class it, but social media is a mass communication medium. And mass communication medium is any medium in which one person, a sender, using technology, send message to heterogeneous audience or individual at the same time. So I have the technology. It's called social media. I can send information to everybody, so many people, and they all get it at the same time. That's mass media. So when I read it, I can see social media there. Others may not see it there because they are looking at mass media as only the traditional media, and especially for those people who are digital immigrants and who have even, some of them have not even decided to migrate, so they are still in their realm. They read that way. But when I am a digital immigrant, because I've migrated and joined the natives, so I understand what is happening, I think that social media falls within the realm. So if somebody publishes something that is defaming, except that we'll be looking at media houses, because National Media Commission has not been empowered to look at individuals who publish stories. We'll look at media houses that publish. So if you decide that you have a Facebook page for GTV and you put something there, you post it on social media, and somebody responds and the person brings the complaint before, we are enjoying to listen to it. I will say we have to, not because on social media, because it's a mass communication medium that we have used, and of which the person is complaining, and so we have to look at it. So as far as I'm concerned, mass media communication falls within the realm of what national media, the things national media can promote, and of course can also educate over.
Well, given the fact that social media is so anonymous, I mean, people could come up with fake Facebook accounts. Yeah. I could create a Facebook using your picture and your name, even though you are not the one. We've seen that happen to people who belong to certain class in society and so on. It will be very difficult, even if everybody were to accept that the NMC can regulate what happens on social media. Your job will be almost impossible.
Right. You see, one, NMC does not regulate individual publications, except that that publication is on a media house page, right? And so, or network. And so NMC cannot go out there. Now, if you publish that thing in a newspaper, fine. Now, so I'm saying that the way I understand this is this. If a media house has a Facebook page, a Twitter handle, and the media house publishes something there, or allows somebody to publish something on that media house's handle or page, then NMC would have some kind of adjudication over it. Now, fake news, yes, but there are means of verification. If you have a handle and it's the authentic ones are verified, and so except that, so if national media is going to take it, you don't just go and say that, okay, this is fake. You have to see whether that Facebook page is verified, whether that Twitter handle is verified. National media will have to go to that extent, and GBC cannot come and claim that they don't know that Facebook page when in fact it belongs to them. So we don't have to look at it that way. Fake news is there. There are means of dealing with fake news. That does not fall within the realm of, it falls within the realm of everybody, including all media houses, for us to do the checkers. But when it comes to whether Media Commission can use a publication on social media or not, I am saying that my person, the way I understand mass communication and mass media, it falls within the realm of what we can adjudicate or settle, provided it is on the page of a network which falls under us.
Finally, Prof, you touched on earlier on the issue of remuneration for journalists, but I'd like us to return to that point very briefly, because I remember at a public forum you did indicate that there are even journalists who are not paid at all by their media houses. Sometimes they're just given a tag and asked to go out there, bring the stories, but also find ways of fending for themselves. This phenomenon goes a long way to corrupting journalists, because then they would have to be pursuing the money and not the truth and so on. How do we address this, Prof?
Right. There are two ways. The first part is trying to encourage media houses to, if you like, make the conditions of service of journalists better. It's a huge exercise, because media houses are more interested in profits, especially the private one, than what they put out there. And so that's the first one, because it's challenging. The second one, which I advocate, especially for those we are training, is what we call entrepreneurial journalism. That is also the trend now. Unfortunately, because we are not training, looking at that position, we are not allowing trainees or journalists who graduate to move into realm that will give them money. One, if we train journalists as entrepreneurs, through because the digital access is there, through various things that they do, and there are courses like that. Unfortunately, nobody is teaching any course like that, but I've read and I've seen that there are courses that are being designed. If you teach them, and every journalist who is trained is moving, most of them are moving into that kind of journalism, you create substitute for the mainstream one, and through that substitute, it means that the price of a journalist goes up. And so I think that as educators, we have to look at the entrepreneurial journalism as a way of helping journalists fend for themselves, because it means that you sit behind a computer, you are producing stories, you are backing your stories with facts and data. You make money through advertising on, and then you don't go to the media. So media houses will now have to chase journalists to get them to work for them. If you are chasing me, you have to pay me more, because I'm on my own and I'm getting a lot more. So if we move towards that trend, we can be making their conditions better. And that means, as I said, the refresher courses that when I come to GBC, then I tell them, okay, now you can even do this work on your own. And then they start thinking, okay, now let me start. And they start, then you put in, okay, I'm resigning, I'm Moomen, but I'm resigning because I want to go and work on my own. They say, Moomen, you can't resign. Yeah. Now what do you do? Okay, then increase my salary. So we need to look at that. For me, as educated, that's what we can do. We can't force anybody to increase salaries, but we can persuade government, unions can persuade media house owners and media houses, even government, to increase, to make the conditions of service of journalists better. That way we can address that issue.
Prof, we've run out of time. We'd like to say thank you very much for your time. You have indeed educated us on most of the issues that concern journalists. At some points, you were speaking to me personally in this conversation, and I do hope that you also did enjoy the conversation we've been having with the Dean of the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Communications, who is also a member of the National Media Commission. He's been speaking to us about all the issues that affect the media practice in Ghana, but especially about journalists in particular, and the quality of training out there. Thank you very much for being a part of the show. We'll see you again tomorrow when we bring you another edition of Moomen Tonight. Have a very good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.